Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's show. I am Liz, joining you as usual from Central Virginia on the unceded ancestral lands of the Monacan Nation. Really glad you're here. And we're going to be talking about a subject that I know that I have delved into in the past on the show, and it's one that I still grapple with personally. So we're just going to keep coming back to it, I think. And that is this. What is the sacred masculine? What does that language mean? What does the union of the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine look like, both in our lives personally and externally out in the world? Not small questions. But answering these questions is the sacred work of our guest today. And so I'm really excited to hear what she has to say on this subject. Sarah Poet is a truth seeker, a soul traveler, a former school creator turned feminine masculine integration expert, and as she says, a medicine woman for modern times. It is Sarah's mission to serve the true evolution of human consciousness, to integrate feminine and masculine on all levels, and to bridge us collectively from separation to connection, and to live a life of integrity and heart. To this end, Sarah is a teacher, energy medicine practitioner, sacred space holder, mentor, and new paradigm leadership coach. She's the host of the Sacred Remembering podcast, and she's the creator of the talk, Consciously Reclaiming the Feminine and Masculine Within Each of Us, which she shared on the TedX Asheville stage in 2019. She is joining us today from her home in Asheville, North Carolina. Sarah, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, here on Cherokee territory. Yeah.
Ah, yes. Thank you for mentioning that. And I just want to start by saying your name might be my most favorite ever. It's so beautiful. Do you write poetry?
Yes and no. So I named myself.
Okay.
If we're talking about going home to her,
Yeah.
I named myself. And so the last name Poet, I'm actually working on a few books. One is a memoir, and I wrote a chapter about this. But as a little girl, I would wander into like the backyard and under a tree and kind of through the neighborhood, soul searching for those places of nature that you can kind of find in suburbia sometimes, and there was this back street, and one day I was just meandering further than I was supposed to go, and there was a mailbox with the last name Poet on it, and like the sun kind of hit it, and I remember it. I mean, I was very young, and I was like, that's supposed to be my name. And I just had this concept of like, there are these different houses, and each of these mailboxes represents that there's a different family in each of these houses. And I didn't know those people. I didn't know like what their family story was, but I was just like, I think I have the wrong name. Like I'm in the wrong place. And so I just grew up like kind of like wanting to be Sarah Poet. And then when I left my more traditional career and I was on this soul seeking journey and reclaiming the feminine, and my soul or spirit or whatever that voice is said, it's time to claim your name now.
Wow.
And so I began kind of preparing for that in the summer of 2018, and then was on a retreat called Soul Fire with Sarah Beek, author. And she had us baptize ourselves in a river here locally in these mountains. And I was like, well, that's why I was picking my name before this ceremony or before this retreat, because there was this like baptism ceremony that I ended up doing with myself in a river. And I claimed my name, and then I changed it legally later.
Oh, wow. What a great story.
Thank you. Yeah. And I don't know how you feel about this kind of topic on the podcast, so I'll tread lightly, but I do, I have done some plant medicine ceremony. I don't, with my teacher, like with a shamanic teacher, I don't just do that for my soul journey or for enlightenment or anything like that. But I have done a few, and I was in one for the sacred feminine one time, and they were like, good job on your name. like, you got it. You got the message.
I love that.
It's like confirmed.
I love that. And,
Yeah.
and thank you for bringing up plant medicine. We really haven't gotten into that much on the show, but I have such a long list of things and it's on there. So but totally fine. Yeah.
Right. It's something that's like emerging in our world. And I've always approached that with caution because I do understand a lot of the energetics of soul and things like that. And you can really, get lost. And so I don't do it without teachers and space holders that I very, very much trust.
Yeah, I think that's wise. And I also just notice, and perhaps you do as well, that white consumer culture tends to take everything and just sort of run with it and turn it into a product. And that's a little messy. So I don't want to do that either.
Yeah. We can kind of like steer away from that topic now. Like bring it up, but it was one of those behind the scenes look at like the name confirmation.
Well, and it's funny, I will say just for listeners in the future, I've had people suggest to me perhaps having plant medicine folks on in the future. So it's definitely something I'm thinking about. So we may hear about that more at some point.
Yeah.
But I want to go back, I guess. Well, I usually like to start the show with getting a little bit of a sense of people's spiritual background as they were growing up. And for me, that feels really important because it's been a rare guest, unless that guest came from a traditional culture that honors the divine feminine, like perhaps they grew up as a Hindu. It's been a rare guest that had any sense of the sacred feminine, in their spiritual tradition. So I kind of like to get the backstory of like, what were you exposed to as a child? So if you're okay starting there, that'd be great.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for the question. It was a really impressionable part of my life to the way that religion and spirituality were presented to me. I was the first of 3 daughters born to a young man who had a lot of trauma in his system, which of course I didn't understand as a young one. But given what my father had been through, he kind of found Jesus as a way to cope, is how I would explain it now. And so he really was quite forceful about us attending this small Methodist church in southern Pennsylvania. And I have the feeling of like the memory of having to be there. I mean, it was very forceful. And I would sit and listen, actually, and I write about this like in my memoir, and I've done a lot of soul searching about this. I was looking for the feminine. I didn't know that I was looking for the feminine, but I was looking for the feminine because, all of the adages about like just obey your father and mother and all of the messages about, women obeying the husbands and Eve being formed from Adam. I was like, what? Like, what? And it's amazing how young we have that inner knowing of like, this is not truth. And so I was actually extremely rebellious against like my father and the church and fought it. And then when I was 16, he actually let me stop going, which was very interesting because looking back on it, I'm very surprised that he let me stop going. But at that point, I was reconnecting with the Native American part of like my lineage and really looking for answers there because my grandfather who had passed, he had 2 brothers. And so my great uncles were still living. And I knew that they were like a significant portion Cherokee. And I was like searching for these answers. And I was living in Susquehanna territory then and like attending powwows and like really searching for this like nature connection. But my family actually wouldn't talk about the indigenous heritage because like that's why they had left the South probably in the late 40s, had left Appalachia. and like cross the Mason-Dixon and plop down, and so as a teenager, I was really soul searching. Um, Both the nature connection and the feminine, and the way that was presenting was like, that was the 90s. I mean, we had singer songwriters, like we had Lilith Fair going on, and Tori Amos was like having orgasms on the piano bench, and and like Sarah
Right.
McLachlan, it's like all of that was happening, and I was just like, yes, this is truth. And then I was doing a lot of reading of like women's lit, if I could get my hands on like college women's lit books, I was like devouring them, and writing a lot of poetry. So yeah, that's like the childhood, but then my rebellious, embodied, feminine ways, it got me pregnant at 18, which is like a whole other thing. And so I'll pause there and see what your next question might be.
Okay. Well, yeah, there's a lot there. And I definitely, I want to come back to that. And it's funny that you say, I don't know. I mean, I grew up in a conservative Christian household too. And I was a really curious kid, and yet it never really hit me that I should be questioning. I sort of just turned it all back on myself. Like, there's nothing wrong with me,
Right.
that this doesn't click,
Which is
but
what they want you to do. Yeah.
of course. Right. Yeah. But, and you name all this, and I'm like, yeah, of course, this is ridiculous. Adam or Eve being born from Adam, and then, Lilith Fair and all that, it didn't click for me. Like, for the longest time, Lilith be referring to the goddess Lilith. I mean, like, none of that was present for me. It took me longer to come online. We'll just put it that way.
Well, no shame, right? Because they don't want you to come online. Like, that's what has been happening is, the church and all of this is like, just conform. And it's very interesting. My soul has some kind of tie that I can't really pinpoint in the physical world, except that like these women who are actually born and raised Mormon, who are like leaving the Mormon church in Utah, I've actually worked with quite a few of them. Like, they come to me in my coaching practice, and so like the religious trauma recovery, like the religious trauma of the feminine, and the recovery from that is some work that I do now, like kind of when people find me for that. But what I wanted to say, because we do want to talk about the masculine today, like, I think it's definitely worth mentioning that I also had like physical, emotional, mental, sexual abuse trauma from my father, which the brain kind of protects you from. If you're familiar with trauma, like, you don't necessarily have the exact memory, but like the body has the memory. And so one thing that I was really rebelling against was also like my father and his control and some abuse patterns, and a really, really deep-seated like thread of evil that ran through him. And so when I was rejecting the church, I was rejecting him and oppression. And, my father told me all about Jesus and God. Like, I had to go to that place and sit in that pew because of him. And then he seemed to be in cahoots with Jesus and God. And then, he would mess up all week long, or like have, a drinking binge or do something horrific. And he would actually come back to us and say, okay, I've gotten right with Jesus and God has forgiven me now. So now you have to as well. Right.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I just grew up learning that like, I don't have any say in what this human does to me or to my body. And he's apparently with, like all this man religion and this men thing is not like it's not appealing to me. And so
Yeah.
I was kind of rejecting all of that. And I rejected that hard for a long time. Like this notion of God as man or God as masculine, definitely rejected that very, very hard for a while, and was definitely rebelling against all of that. But as a child, like you can't articulate that or pinpoint that.
Right.
It takes a lot of looking backwards to see what was really going on.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. And that kind of leads me to where I wanted to ask you next, which was, you mentioned the 90s and women's lit and Lilith Fair, and there was, a lot that was happening there. Did you see that at the time as an expression of what we would, I don't know if you use the language sacred feminine. I think you do. What we
I
would
do.
now call the sacred feminine, and at what point did that kind of click? Like there is this thing that is not a male god that might be a counterpart, and I know it as the sacred feminine. Did that happen kind of gradually, or was there a specific point at which that came online for you?
I would say my soul was always searching for it and aware of it. I did not have words to articulate it. And in my TEDx, I actually talk about like being pregnant with my daughter at the age of 18 and 19. And, I'm such an old soul that I was like reading Ina May Gaskin and really wanting to like do a natural childbirth. Like no one in my family or immediate surroundings understood anything about that kind of thing. But my instinct was go primal.
Yeah.
Like my instinct was, you know, learn the body, like listen to the body's ways. And the biggest spiritual download that I had was regarding my daughter's name. So when I got pregnant, I was actually in North Carolina, where I live now. I have this ancestral, I have this soul contract with these mountains, like with the Appalachians, and so I've kind of moved from Pennsylvania to North Carolina, and then I got pregnant and I moved back, and then I've resided here now for 15 years in North Carolina. So I actually got pregnant here. My first semester of college in North Carolina, I had to go back home to Pennsylvania because oops, I got pregnant. And, being raised in that kind of church with that kind of patriarchal control, I was not supposed to be pregnant. I was not supposed to be like dropping out of college because I got pregnant in my very first semester. So there was a ton of shame, and I was kind of like admonished to the basement of my parents' home. And so, just like navigating that, and there was like no bedroom door. I was like in a twin bed in our playroom, like our childhood playroom. And, just like this pregnant young woman reading these books and searching for answers and like trying to trust. And so the biggest, clearest like spiritual download came through. I was sitting in the bed one day, and this voice said, her name is Anna Faith. And I said, I like Anna, but the Faith thing, like that belongs to my father. What? Like what? And the voice said, her name is Anna Faith. And Liz, I cannot tell you what it was in me that listened to that, but I knew that it was true. Like that voice came in so clearly. And so on her birth certificate, I named her Anna Faith. She was adopted 3 days later at birth into an open adoption, which means I chose her family. I still know my daughter. All of it was very, very, very blessed. And I believe through my lineage, through my ancient lineage of the sacred feminine, because who she's actually named for is Anna, the grandmother of Jesus. And I didn't know that until much later. And I'm happy to continue to fill in the gaps of the story, because I, said that I didn't want Jesus, right? And then like many, many years later, I realized that that voice was actually, she's named for the grandmother of Jesus. And the faith part, the way I knew that in my like 18-year-old mind was, I knew that this baby needed to go into the world. Like I knew that I was like the vessel that was meant to bring her through. I knew it. I was so good at being pregnant. I mean, I like took care of this baby like as well as any adult woman would have. I did everything naturally. I followed every intuition. I did it so differently, and I fought any like pitocin, or like I didn't give her any drugs. I was like, no, she's pure. So I birthed this 9-pound 3-ounce baby like completely naturally at the age of 19, because I was like driven by this sacredness that I didn't know what that was. So the faith piece was, I knew that like, if you're going to give your baby into the world, you have to have a faith like bigger than, anything I had known before. But I absolutely knew that she would be okay. Like it was like this deal that I had with the angels, like I knew that her life would be completely protected. And I could feel that at that point in time. Like, okay, I can't keep her. She can't live in this basement with me. I have to keep her protected from these parents, even though I'm not really acknowledging why, but like by being adopted, she also escaped intergenerational child abuse. And so it was this like, okay, I know she has to go. I know I have to bring her through. I know it's precious and pure. And I know that she's going to be okay. And it's like this faith. What does the Bible say? Like faith that can move mountains or something? Like it was just pure faith. And so that was the name that I gave to her. And then there's this metaphor, because her middle name became Anna, and the faith was like dropped. So her parents gave her a different first name, and her middle name was Anna. And then I feel like, reclaiming faith was for certain a part of my awakening.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happened after that, like after I lost her, was I went into what we do when we collectively and in the psyche shut out and shut down the feminine, is that I, like my whole life, my whole recipe that was given to me for making something of myself was just achievement. And
Mm-hmm.
like this message that, you couldn't have your baby because you weren't like educated enough yet and
Right.
successful enough yet. And so it was like, by damn, I'm going to go do it. And not that that worked out, but I tried very, very hard, very exhaustingly for over a decade. And then kind of like woke up. And so in that reawakening is when I said, there is a feminine,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to go get her. Like
Mm-hmm.
this is supposed to live in me. And so it's only, I mean, my podcast and part of my work is called Sacred Remembering, right? So it's in that, like that remembering of what that younger self knew, and being like, oh yeah, those hints were there all the time. And for goodness sakes, I listened to this voice like say this is her name. Like the
Mm-hmm.
guidance was there for sure.
Yeah. I love that. Um, I was talking about this idea of faith, just that word, on a recent podcast too with Dr. Christina Cleveland. And we were talking about how, at least in, I think she would say in her experience of the Christian church and my experience of the Christian church, faith gets sort of translated into belief without question.
Yeah,
And
obedience. Yeah.
yes, exactly. And that
Yeah.
for me and my exploration of the sacred feminine, there is a huge element of faith, but it doesn't have anything to do with dogma or obedience. It has to do with like recognition of, the idea of eminence, that she is everywhere, that she's never not here. And so like she's alive in every living thing. And so there's no way she can't be present in you or in that situation.
Yeah.
And so then faith becomes like
Yeah.
comfort. It's not like something like I've got to
Mm.
suspend any of my questions or anything like that. Not at all. It's just like, yeah, whatever you're doing, all is well. All may not be good, you know what I mean? But she's present. So I love that, the use of the name Faith. I think it's really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, she's definitely present. And what I realized through my awakening as well was she was always there. It's like
Yeah.
the voice of my soul, all of those intuitions, all of those pings. And certainly still, the more I listen to that, the more life, the more I'm dancing with life.
Mhm.
And I think that was like, I just want to say this for anyone listening who's like, I think I have intuitions, or like, what are those things called intuitions? Or is, she with the capital S talking to me? And it's like, please just trust yourself. Like, whether what's on your heart is like big or small. I mean, those ideas that like ping at you are always right, and it's always your soul guiding you. Um, yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
uh-huh,
Such a good reminder.
yeah.
Well, I want to ask you, um, I want to ask you then where this awareness and knowledge of like masculine, feminine, well, and maybe even before. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's just talk about the fact that this language is challenging right now. So I want to ask you, are you talking about biology, or are you talking about something else? Because when we start to use the language masculine and feminine, I feel like we start to get into some interesting territory, right? Of
I love that question. Thanks for
yeah,
just asking that, because sometimes I forget to go back to basics. And
yeah.
so I love that. No, we all have feminine and masculine archetypes in us. We all do it. So it's an energetic, like the feminine is vast and intuitive and fluid and emotional and watery and wisdom, like that Sophianic wisdom. And the masculine is like space holder and this cognition and the thing that plants the seeds of the ideas, and the one who manages, and the one who sometimes, yeah, we talk about the masculine being the thing that holds the container, but more so it's the structure.
Yeah.
And so you can hear throughout what I said that like those are all qualities that we all need. Like in my life as mother, entrepreneur, mentor, um, also, deep energy intuitive. Like I need both. I need the masculine to set the structure and the schedules and manage the money and like carry through the actions of like based on my intuitions, right? But then I also need my feminine to commune with nature and pause and listen for those deep inner knowings and go deep into the emotional and like excavate that material, that soul truth. But I need both of those active in my life. Um, and this is a really big topic, but we can look at it behaviorally. Like I just kind of mapped out some things that are almost behavioral. So I can take, if you talk to me and you told me about what your work week looks like, I could identify where you're in the feminine energetic and where you're in the masculine energetic. And I
Mm.
can actually help you all like whether it's like one woman or an entrepreneur trying to run a business. And we see a lot of feminine business owners, like women reclaiming the sacred feminine struggling with structure, struggling with like looking at the dollars and the numbers and actually struggling to like make money. Right. And so that was what happened on my journey, but I can get into that. But I also work with couples, and I can look at the couple and I can be like, okay, here's where, this partner, regardless of gender, is in feminine. And here's where the other partner is like responding to that, polarity. So in a partnership, we also have this polarity that expresses, and sometimes, like, it does not matter the gender. You could be holding feminine or masculine polarity in your partnership. A lot of the times what women want in a partnership is if it's a heterosexual partnership, for the man to actually like step into a more conscious masculine so she can express this like deeper essence of the feminine. Well, our men aren't initiated into that yet, and so I also work with women, like, what do we do? Like, what do we do when that's the case? And so I see feminine and masculine. It was like, Liz, it happened in my life whether I wanted it to or not. It was the thing that I quested after. And I just like first began to read like Marianne Woodman and the Jungian material on like what is conscious feminine and what is conscious masculine. And then it became looking at it in my own life and spending a couple of years really deep in reclaiming the sacred feminine. And with that came a lot of reclamation of the body, of course, reclamation of my own thought, like the right to be me and standing in the truth of who I am and all of that, but reclaiming my body from the trauma that had occurred in relation to father and church, right?
Mhm.
Because some of my sexual trauma actually occurred in the walls of the church. So
Wow.
imagine that juxtaposition, right?
Yeah.
So in my feminine system, I began to, like, as my feminine was healing and clearing, and by this time I was an entrepreneur running this business, like where I was coaching women in their own path of remembrance. But there were some things that I kept kind of like fumbling on, which were, organization and like time optimization, just in practicality, because I had been a school principal. I knew how to hustle. I knew how to hold that masculine, that like patriarchal masculine pushing energy. And I knew I didn't want to do that anymore. So I swung the pendulum to, well, I'm just going to flow through my day. I'm going to, manifest these clients by being in my emotionality and writing from this place. And I didn't have the concept yet that I have to get right with the masculine. And so I'm going to kind of slow down because I know that you asked me what these were, and now I'm kind of using some of my journey to um, to dive into that. But I hope that that expresses like just the beginning of both are in all of us, regardless of gender. I think it's actually a really rich and beautiful conversation to be like, what if we don't talk about gender for a minute and just like talk about these energetics and archetypes? Like, I think it can be really unifying.
Mhm.
And the other thing I want to say about it is not all feminine is created equal, not all masculine is created equal. So the way I explain it, just for so that we can grok it conceptually, is we have conscious masculine and conscious feminine. And that is what I call sacred. And that those are essences. Like we can tease out some qualities of those, but that's where we actually also get into a spiritual realm. Okay.
Mhm.
Then we have behaviors of humans that fall into the category of like unconscious feminine and masculine. And when you go unconscious, you could be in a hyper expressed masculine, a hyper expressed feminine, or an under expressed masculine and an underexpressed feminine. And so you can kind of see that when I outline it that way, it's almost like there are 6 categories.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is conscious? What is the conscious energetic archetype? What are the human behaviors that are associated with that? You know, most of us are going to spend a lot of time trying to be in that territory, right? Or like awakening to that territory. And then usually what's happening is, because of our childhood traumas, because of our previous associations with feminine and masculine, because of like being told that we had to work really hard in order to earn, you know, like we can be in those hyper or hypo expressions of feminine and masculine. Would you like me to give an example? I kind of see your eyes like
Yeah,
thinking about
no,
it.
I know I would. And I mean, my mind is just kind of spinning. And so one of the
Yeah,
things that I
funny.
was
Okay.
thinking of, like when you were saying hyper masculine, is I was thinking toxic. When we say toxic masculinity, that's where my mind goes when you say, if like, if you know, because I'm also thinking,
Yeah.
and maybe we'll bookmark this, but I want to say it now before I forget. I want to talk about this from an individual level. And I also want to talk about the individual as part of the collective,
Yeah.
right? So how do we hold, right? Because even if we find balance in ourselves in this energetically, we are not in a balanced society, like by a long stretch, right? And so how does that play work as well? Like you as an individual finding balance within yourself, but also trying to do that in a culture that really isn't balanced at all.
Yeah.
And you know,
Yeah.
you could
Yeah.
agree or disagree with that, but yeah.
The way I approach that, I somewhat avoid using the word balance personally,
Oh, it does imply
because
stasis, doesn't it? Kind of.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like almost like an impression of a state of perfection or something that
Yes.
so what I like to do is dance,
Oh, I like
like
that.
in these energetics within me,
Yeah.
right? So, and they are always fluid. Like if I am in logistics mode, I'm in more of a masculine orientation in that moment. If I am channeling for a client, I'm fully in my feminine, right? And
Mhm.
so those two are dancing, but my inner feminine has learned to support my inner masculine, and my inner masculine has learned to support my inner feminine. I will say too that this is also my definition of God is mother, father, God.
Mhm.
And so unification happens for me on all levels, in all spaces. And so, you know, when I'm talking with a woman, for example, about her relationship to the masculine, conceptually, again, I like to like, how do we even work with this? This is so complex. 3 things. What's your relationship to the masculine in you? What's your relationship to the masculine in men, in other people, in your or in a partnership? And what's your relationship with the masculine in the divine?
Mhm.
And then we heal by healing the traumas and projections in all of those places.
Yeah.
So let me talk about well, you said the word toxic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Reframe if you'd like. Yeah.
I think it's really easy and almost compelling for women who have been so hurt and the feminine has been so oppressed to like want to make masculine or men the enemy, and or like take the power back. You know, that's what feminism was doing for a long time, and important work on the way to unification. So I attempt to describe behaviors like rather than judging them. And so
Mhm.
if I say toxic masculinity, you know, I'm the mother of a son, and my second child is a boy, and he just turned 13, identifies as male. And I don't want to label masculinity is toxic, because I want to like stay open to the possibilities and potentials that we all heal together. So let's just like break down quickly that, association with toxic usually has something to do with oppression and going after a goal no matter what, running anything over in its path, maybe taking advantage of feminine energy or the environment, and just,
Yeah.
maybe consuming that kind of thing.
Objectification. Yeah.
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 Mhm.
Okay. So I know that this is like potentially a stretch, but this is a question that I have been asking myself and asking female entrepreneurs lately. Because, we say like, okay, I'm going to start a business, I'm going to do it differently. And I'm like, well, do you ever work 2 extra hours when you're already tired? Do you ever like push through? And the answer for all of us is yeah, and maybe we have like a lot of justification for quote unquote like needing to do that. And that's your inner masculine's relationship with your inner feminine. So, like the willingness to deplete the feminine energy for the sake of getting something done. Like, this is where a lot of my personal contemplation is right now, especially in redefining work. Like, I'm a single parent, I'm an entrepreneur, like, I'm responsible for my income. And so, what is my formula? What is my recipe for how I like bring in money? And, historically, like I was a school principal, I have 2 master's degrees. I know how to hustle, but my body doesn't want me to hustle. And I know that that's not the new paradigm. And it disrespects my inner feminine, and it disrespects like the feminine energetic on the planet when I do that. And so, what does it look like? And just living in this inquiry and this curiosity, right? Because we're in uncharted territory. What does it look like for my feminine to be like uplifted and like at the table of my own life? Because this is what we want for the feminine, right? We want the intuition to have a place, and we want the rest and restoration and the opportunity to like regenerate. We want that for the feminine. How do I create that in my own life? And it's been very, very interesting to do that without a partner. Like, I've had some partners and like did some experimentation with that. Like, what does it look like to receive from a man? That's a whole other topic. But I think it's actually been my soul's journey to figure out the crux of this without partnership.
Mhm.
Like, I don't have, an external masculine that I can be like, hey, would you please provide some structure for our week? Would you please provide some income into the family? Would you please provide some discipline for the child? Like, I don't have that, right? So it's this internal dance between like what is conscious feminine, what is conscious masculine. How does my inner masculine set up structures that support me like receiving money to replenish the feminine and her energy, and like buy the good food and take care of the baby and all these things? And like, how does my inner feminine also support that inner masculine?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I don't know if it's quite the yin yang symbol that's coming to me. I mean, obviously that's the idea. I think of that. I'm not a Taoist, but I think that's the idea of that symbol. But I see like something of an energetic flow, like I can kind of see
Yeah.
those energies sort of merging and separating and merging and separating. And one of the things that came to mind as you were talking is also the idea of stress in a positive sense, stress in terms of resilience, meaning if we go back to your example of working, a couple of extra hours, like pushing yourself, right? And maybe in one viewpoint, that's taxing the feminine or taking advantage of the feminine. However, we also know, anybody who's a parent knows, right, that you need to put your children in situations that are going to require them to demonstrate resilience, require them to test the boundaries, require them to see what is possible. And so I guess what I was seeing, and I'd love to hear you reflect on this, is how that can actually, if done consciously and intentionally, right? Like, you're not just doing it, I'm going to do this every day, I'm going to work till 8 p.m. because I have to, blah, blah, blah. But if it's like with intention, this is allowing me to bring this sacred purpose to the world, which is powered by my feminine. This is actually strengthening her and allowing her to be, bigger is not the right word, but you know what I'm doing. I'm like doing this gesture of expansiveness for people who are listening.
Yeah, because one doesn't exist without the other. I mean, in nature, like, one doesn't exist without the other. We really can't separate these. And so I really very much agree with you that energetically, how would I say this? Now, this might be going a little far out there, but this is also one thing that I've been contemplating lately. A lot of people say the masculine is like the riverbanks to the feminine's river. Have you heard that?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
No, I don't think so.
When people start to like, oh, I'm in the sacred feminine space and I want the sacred masculine man to show up and like be the riverbanks to my river. I mean, it's like in all of these sacred feminine places on the internet. And I'm like, stop saying that. Like, we actually don't want the feminine to just be held by the masculine, or like just be defined by the space that the masculine's providing. I think that's a very old patriarchal thinking, kind of with like a wonderful attempt to make it, more conscious. What I see happening more accurately is the healthier that feminine is, the more space she's like taking up, because the feminine is so spacious. So I don't want my feminine to be like, you have to fit into this container that this man can hold, or this job, or like whatever can hold, because that feels so tight to the feminine.
Yeah.
And that expression is like, but he can't hold all of me, or he can't see all of me. Well, no, he can't. But we don't want him to. What we want him to be able to do, or what the masculine very naturally does when conscious, when invited into feminine spaces that are safe to open, is that like the masculine penetrates. I mean, that's what it does. Like a sperm penetrates an egg. And so you can look at it like as in every, space in the spaciousness of the feminine, the masculine actually like penetrates that space. And so, if the feminine can like open wider and be in her full expression, the conscious masculine, which we don't have a lot of examples of men who can do this yet, but the conscious masculine conceptually will be able to meet every single place that she can open to. So let me put this into language as to why this is important for a woman who is waking up on a sacred feminine path.
Yeah.
We have trauma in our body. We have sexual trauma in our body. We have just trauma from oppression and from patriarchy. And we carry that in our bodies, in our wombs, in our cells. We inherit some of it intergenerationally. That trauma creates a constriction because there's fear. It hasn't been safe to open. And so much of this sacred work on the path of reclaiming the sacred feminine is standing in the truth of who we are, awakening to our power, coming back into reclaiming the body and reclaiming the capacity of the womb space of our creative energy, like all of these things that you and I know. And then like reintroducing the masculine into that space is tricky. Really, really tricky. And I want to name that I've been on that journey of like, what does it feel like to reintroduce masculine into my sacred feminine spaces? Like in my body, in my time, in my, in my life. And it's really tricky.
Yeah.
Because our brothers are like male, masculine embodied people have had a lot of suffering also because they've been separated from the sacred feminine, the great mother. They've been separated from the actual masculine, the Holy Father. And so, when we're a woman and we're like on this path of something very common that happens, is like we start looking outside of ourselves and we're like, where are the sacred masculine? Where's the man who can meet me? Where is like the man who has done his work? And we start to orient to masculine and sacred masculine in that way. First, it's very natural, like on a path of being human and on a path of awakening. I want to invite every woman listener to consider this instead. Stop orienting to the masculine in men as your example of what's possible for masculinity. And instead, open your heart like the feminine knows how to do. Open your heart and start asking yourself, what is sacred masculine to me? What is Holy Father to me? There's probably going to be a lot of debris and trauma in the beginning of those answers because we have to clear that. But that's what I found. And it required a lot of projection where, I had a lot of father wounds, a lot of examples of unsafe masculinity, toxic, if you will. And I was looking for a man that wouldn't do those things. You see, like, because we have the masculine trauma, that becomes our orientation. Like, who's going to prove to me that won't happen to me again? And that's a trap. Because what the subconscious is actually going to attract in that moment is the exact thing that you are trying to not attract. That's what happened for me a couple of times. I met deep, deep soulmates. I met the men that, people would say are like twin flames. And they woke me up to, this is not about finding the man that's going to be that expression of this. This is about my inner relationship with feminine and masculine, both. And that waking up was a few years ago now. Like to like, this needs to happen. And then like the quest, I'm still in it. I'm still in it. This question of like, what, I have a sense, a remembrance in my heart of what the Holy Father is. That doesn't have anything to do with those like original church days. And I have cleared masculine behaviors from my life, like in terms of relationships, like men who just want to like consume of the feminine, or have a woman like emotionally labor for them, or like plenty of men want to take women's energy, and plenty of like very empathic, very beautiful women have been very willing to give that to men, like in the hopes that they wake up. That's not the way to do it. And so I've actually cleared these unconscious templates of masculinity from my life. Like, I don't have relationships with men who are operating primarily from the unconscious. And I don't offer my life force energy to waking men up unless they are my client and they have asked me to serve them.
Mm.
Right. So that there's like an appropriate exchange of energy. We are just so many thousands of years into a patriarchy, into a patriarchal system that is now changing, where feminine energy was like at the disposal of this thing that we called the masculine, but that thing that we called the masculine was actually a monster. And so the conscious masculine wants to uplift the feminine.
Mm.
The conscious masculine serves the feminine. The conscious masculine says, how can I help? And, you think about like King Arthur, who like created the round table for his community and took care of like women and children, and the knights put their bodies on the lines for women and children. That's the kind of masculine I want to remember and believe in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just thinking about mythologies, that teach us
Yeah.
about the sacred and masculine. And I think, and I say I think because I honestly don't know, but I feel like in the little that I've heard from some Indigenous American traditions, there's a
Yeah.
real clear understanding of what, like, even a warrior is. It doesn't even,
Yeah.
it's not even, doesn't even start with the definition of fighting necessarily, but it is that
Yeah.
protective role. And I want to go back to the riverbanks thing. That was
Yeah.
kind of, because as you were saying that, I was remembering, I don't know if you saw this, but a few years ago, there was a viral social media post that was going around by the writer Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about the Mississippi River and how the Army Corps of Engineers had decided that they wanted her to flow steadily. So they were like trying to map it out and like reinforce the banks, but the banks kept moving because the feminine moves even the banks. So even the riverbank analogy, it's not going to hold you in. Like the bank should be moving because she is flow and change.
Yeah.
So
she can't be held. And so, I mean, as we're reimagining this, and this is what I reimagine in entrepreneurship and, financial flow and these kinds of things. I mean, I'm deep in this all the time, obviously, but the river flows, and the feminine is healing, and the feminine is waking up, and the feminine is like growing wider into bigger and bigger spaces. So what if we flip that script and like the masculine is responding to that?
Yes.
I was kind of like in this little like scrunchy place in my business of like, wow, I really have a lot of tasks right now. And I found myself responding to the tasks. So my feminine energy was like, oh my gosh, I have so many tasks. And like the tasks were dictating how I used my energy. So I'm just going to name task, action, masculine, and like my life force energy, I'm just going to say that's feminine. That's my river. So my river was like responding to the tasks. And then I actually had this energy healing session this week. And after that, I was like, I am not responding to the tasks anymore. This is ludicrous. Like, why am I responding to tasks? I feel what wants to happen next. Right. And that is what dictates what gets done. Mm-hmm. And so I just stopped caring about the list this week or like the tasks. I just stopped. And I was like, I'm showing up. I'm here. I'm going to attune to what needs to happen, but I'm not going to like, blow over this time that I have with my son because there's this task list. And so I just began to be like, what is the one thing in front of me and how do I want to tend to it? Because the feminine tends, it's like, how am I bringing my heart to this? How am I tending to this? And so I just started to do that. Like whatever I was doing, I was like, am I flowing? Am I enjoying this? In that way, I stopped depleting myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So like the masculine is like, how can I help this Sophianic wisdom body that is the feminine, like coming back and re-enlivening on the planet through you and me? I mean, the answers to where we're going are like inside of women. I just keep saying this over, like in every place I am. I'm like, the answers to where we're going are inside of women. But a lot of times they can't get out because of so much self-doubt, or being given these like old paradigm recipes for how to work and how to behave, or our truest expressions can't get out because we have layers of masculine related trauma
Mm-hmm.
that is like blocking our courage and capacity to like truly open.
Mm-hmm.
um and I just want to say, for anyone listening, it is so possible to heal the masculine related trauma. And I won't even make it like it takes time and diligence and intention and inquiry. But I think that the core piece that I always try to express to women is that the curiosity about what the masculine truly is inside of our hearts. Like that's where it is. And so, we can heal, like we can do the trauma work, we can do this sacred feminine reclamation, we can like, we'll continue to do all the things because we're women. Like we're women who are awakening and who want to claim our lives. And so we'll do it. It's not a matter of like, if we will. But it takes some time.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Sure.
This is so rich, Sarah.
I hope that I didn't flood everyone.
No, I love that we're still on the water, like,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
not at all.
Uh-huh.
But I do think you gave us so much to think about. And I'm feeling like this is a perfect place to just kind of stop and pause and just, as listeners, digest that. I know there's a lot for me to think about too. Just, I love the visual of the dance of the sacred
Yeah,
feminine and the sacred masculine. And so just even taking that into meditation or dream space or art, and just really kind of feeling
yeah,
into that. It feels like that's the next step for me. So maybe for
yeah.
others as well.
Right, right. I mean, we want these two reunified.
Yeah.
Like, I so deeply want them reunified in my heart, in in creation. Like I want the mountains that I'm looking at right now to like be able to regenerate as they wish and stop being, mined for coal and to build
Yeah.
big houses. Like I want the feminine to regenerate, and I want the masculine to be in that warrior space that helps that to happen.
Yeah.
And I also want the masculine to bring through its divine wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
because we haven't heard from that, and I'll circle back to Jesus here to end. Like in a sacred remembering moment, a few years ago, I had an altar in my home, really to union, but I had a picture of Mary Magdalene, and then I had a picture of Master Jesus, which I've been instructed to call him now. And because he is an ascended master, of course. And there was so much a part of my journey that we didn't even talk about, but in that Christ lineage, it was very, very important for me to realize that Mary Magdalene was his divine union partner.
Yeah.
And so I just like held this space in my home, the very center of my home, like hearth, right? And I had pictures of both of them, and I had like a crystal grid doing that work and just following my soul. And in the middle of the night one night, he woke me up, like this, like knock, knock, knock. And it was like Jesus, and was like, hi, I'd like to talk to you. And sometimes when I don't get the message during the waking hours, like I'll get woken up during the night to be like, hello, like, let me cut through the subconscious. And he said, you've done a really, really good job bringing her back. Like, you own it out loud, you live it, her energy. I love her so much. You did that to bring her back, and I love you for it. But do you ever think who she's sitting beside? Because I had pictures of them both. And he said, do you know me? And I said, I don't. He's like, right. So you had to prove that she got back there beside me, but you don't know me and you don't know how I love her. And so he said, would you like to? And I said, yeah. Right. And like, that was the turning commitment where I began to heal the relationship with the masculine.
Beautiful.
So, yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you so much. I know, I'm like, maybe to be continued. Who knows? We may have to have you back at some point, and we'll keep going on this, because I do think this idea of Christ consciousness, and it's just an interesting one to me too. So we'll put a pause for now, but maybe
Sounds
come back at some
good.
point. Yeah.
I would love to. Thank you. And I welcome anyone to peruse the episodes of the Sacred Remembering podcast, because we definitely traverse these topics in
Yeah.
that
Yes.
podcast
And
as well.
I'll make sure that I put a link in the show notes to your show, and it's sarahpoet.com, your website, correct?
That is.
Yep. And I believe your Instagram is Embodied Breath, but I'll make sure, right.
Yes.
I'll make sure I put that in the show notes as well. Yeah. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here in conversation with me. I loved it.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And thanks to all of you guys for listening. As always, I'm so glad that you're here. And, you can subscribe, you can tell people about it, you can give the show a favorable review, you can do all those things. Send me feedback. I'd love to hear from you. Whatever feedback you've got, you can reach me through any of the social media channels that I have. And yeah, till next time, take care.